I have a lot to talk about today, and so we've got to get to a few things quickly. Got a couple of guests lined up on the program. Steve Millington joins us as he does on most Tuesday mornings, and we'll be talking in just a little under half an hour about some of the events taking place, mainly at the state capitol, but he'll be giving us his viewpoint. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party, and he'll be coming by in 20 minutes or so and joining us on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as the big voice just told you a moment ago. It's 40. Sure felt a lot colder this morning after what I've been used to the last few days. The weather, though, not terrible. We'll have more details on that coming up a bit later, of course. At about 8 minutes now after 8 o'clock this morning, also coming up on the program, Ed Matson is a U.S. Marine. I didn't say former Marine because there's no such thing. He was a U.S. Marine, served his country for 5 years in Southeast Asia in the Vietnam War, and is now a syndicated columnist and also has written a book called Down on Main Street, and he's trying to find a prescription to revive the United States and maybe do it on some basic old principles. But he says, as he's walked main streets around the country, he has found people that he believes could very well play a major role in the turnaround of the good old USA. He's scheduled to join us just after 9 o'clock this morning. And then I have a couple of other topics, too, as well, that I'd like to get to, but one right off the top of the show. We picked up this story yesterday. If you were looking at our website, newsradio1310.com, you would have noticed it right away. There is some dispute now. We have some folks in the state legislature who are proposing. They've had a hearing about having open carry when it comes to, or rather concealed carry without needing a permit. That would mean for firearms. And we spent a few minutes yesterday talking about the reaction from some of the lefties at the newspapers who are just, they are having bladder control issues as we speak because they are so worried about this because somebody else who's not nearly as smart as they are might have an issue or a problem with this. And I said they cited a couple of gun deaths in the last year saying, here's a good example of how people just don't know what they're doing with firearms. They did not cite how many gun deaths there are every year in the state, going back maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 years, because statistically it may not make any difference. But we picked up the story yesterday. Benito managed to get it on the website really early in the day. And this is also being picked up now by Associated Press. I happened to see this morning. 2 Eastern Idaho law enforcement officials and a firearms instructor say allowing residents to carry concealed weapons without needing a permit is a bad idea. And they're joining some of those newspaper editors and saying, look, some people may already be criminals. We need to have background checks. Some people may just be dangerous and they're going to need training. I am not opposed to anyone getting training when it comes to the use of firearms. On the other hand, I don't know that the Constitution says we have to make it mandatory. And so the other part of this is doing background checks because criminals may end up carrying. I'm sorry, but criminals already carry. That's why they're criminals. This is if they want a firearm, they'll kick somebody's back door in when they're not home and see if they can find one inside. You've got all sorts of things like that constantly going on. They'll make some of their own. There's all sorts of options people have available out there if they plan to use a firearm in the commission of a crime. And we already have laws against that sort of thing. So I don't know what we're dealing with here. One thing a friend of mine who reacted to this said to me yesterday, and he said it's a legitimate argument. Law enforcers say it's going to make our job potentially more difficult. But I don't know anyone who ever decided to go into a career in law enforcement because they were looking for an easy job. And from what I understand, there's nothing easy about it. So yes, it definitely could make your life easier. If we were all Velcroed to our walls at home and we never came outdoors, it'd be the best job in the world now, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have a lot of stress whatsoever. But we can't do that because we couldn't function culturally if everyone was strapped to a wall at their house and could never come outside. The only place I think that's been tried is North Korea, and they're looking at another famine coming up where a few million people are going to be dying over the course of the next few months. Not anything that I'd like to have a part of or have an interest in. And of course, they don't have any firearms there. You know, there's no personal ownership of firearms, so people can't object to the government policies that continue to starve them. So I was looking through this story, and it says that Bannock County Sheriff Lauren Nielsen and Pocatello Police Chief Scott Marchand and firearms instructor Sam Clark Tell the Idaho State Journal that the constitutional carry bill introduced by lawmakers last week presents problems. Well, there are problems all over this planet, all over this country, all over this state. And I'm just telling you right now, in some communities where they have similar laws like this, you are not seeing any great upsurge in crime. In fact, you're seeing less of it. And I don't think you're seeing any great upsurge in the volume of actual accidents. And a lot of people out there simply don't have any interest in owning firearms. Just because you would clear the way and make it easier for people to carry doesn't mean that everyone's going to run out and start buying firearms so they can walk up and down the streets and play cowboy. But that's what they try to tell you from the liberal angle on all of this. I posted this story at Facebook, and I'd be interested in some of your feedback as well. The Facebook feedback was incredible. I get occasional feedback on a story I post at Facebook. I mainly just post a lot of things there with the idea just seeing what's going to get people's attention. If you post something about net neutrality, yeah. But if you post something about concealed carry and the lack of a permit, but the viewpoint there, I have to admit, is split. In my Facebook followers, twisted bunch that they are, there is a split, and it's not really down the middle. I would say it's overwhelmingly 80% like the idea of this law, and these are people reacting from states all over the country. There is probably a fifth of that group that says we still need to have people trained. Once more, I think that firearms training is a great thing. I've never been through an actual certified course, but when I was a little boy, my father, who had been trained by the U.S. Army and had all sorts of marksman medals of his own, he and a friend of his, Larry Curtin, who also had been a marksman in the U.S. Army, they took me out and they taught me how to safely use firearms. And I was just a little boy. They had to, at some point, I remember they were worried about some recoil on some of the more powerful firearms that I got to use. They would literally put their hands on my shoulders behind me because they were worried that, when I'm firing a .357, it was going to knock me tail over teacup. But they taught me safe handling, and we went through all of these rules and regulations. And then in high school, I did have an archery course, and in the archery course, I learned safe handling of arrows and the like, because clearly you don't want to put an arrow through somebody next to you on the range. So I had all of that background, but I never actually went through some course where someone sat down and took down all of my, what do they want? Your fingerprint, a retinal scan, this notion that we have to pile up records on everyone is just beyond me, because what type of culture do we plan to live in at some point? And yes, I get back to my Velcro comments. There are people out there who feel that and it's always said, well, this is how we have to keep you safe. If you just give up a few more liberties, we could keep you safer. Well, ultimately, you're charged with your own safety. And self-defense is one way I think that we can deal with that. So it's up for debate. You can reach me this morning at 736-0300. 736-0300. I think I've weighed in and I've given my opinion on it the last couple of days. And I don't see a problem with this. And I also don't see people rushing out and having gunfights in the streets outside of saloons just because this law passes. I think that's a little... The American landscape has been getting safer for the last 40-some years. Crime statistics, it's incredible. But the number of homicides and the number of other violent crimes, there's an occasional spike. You might have a year that's an outlier. But for the most part, if you look at the last 40 years or so, the number of school shootings, for instance, those are down. Why do we think that they're epidemic? Well, back in 1975, there was a shooting at a high school 14 miles down the road from where I lived. A guy named Gary Barbaro, who had been a marksman himself, got up on the roof and started shooting at people. He later hanged himself in a county jail before he ever went to trial. Saved the taxpayers a great deal of money, I should point out. And not that I'm recommending criminals do that, but he at least decided he'd made a mistake and that it was time to end it all. But he didn't get a lot of coverage. I happened to be in South Carolina with my family when this took place, and we heard about it very briefly. A network newscast came up while we were driving in the car. We recognized the name of the school, and then we didn't hear anything more about it till we got back home. The local papers, of course, covered it. But there was no CNN, there was no Fox, there was no MSDNC. So you didn't get the impression that people were just running around shooting everybody up all of the time. That's what's doing it. You're looking at this television. The old Donald Rumsfeld joke about that guy robbing the museum in Baghdad. He said, well, once you've seen it 48 times a day, you get the idea that this is epidemic. It's not. 8:17. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's up with you? Patience, my friends, patience. 736-0300, 736-0300. Or you can email me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That is Bill. And the last name is Colley. Bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. But I am telling you, you can look over these figures, you can look over these statistics. There's even a couple of economists who claim, and this is the sad part of all of this, they claim that a reason that we're seeing so little crime compared to what we saw in the 1960s and 1970s is because of Roe v. Wade. And because of those 60 million babies who were killed in their mother's wombs, 30 million of them were going to grow up and be criminals. They're not there today. And they actually have had that peer reviewed. They've had their research tested. Sad commentary, but there may be some truth to it. Despite that, all of these notions that somehow it's dangerous to walk up and down streets probably is just a bunch of hooey. And the people who are promoting that are trying to promote big government, like your local newspaper. And they're trying to promote more and more of that control because in their socialist nature, that's, there's an Eric Honecker in every one of these people who's just bursting to get out and control you. Coming up on 8:19, we've got a couple of guests joining us this morning. In a little over 10 minutes, probably about 15 minutes, Steve Millington is going to join us, chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. And then just after 9 o'clock news this morning, Ed Mattson. Ed Mattson has written a book called Down on Main Street. He is a Vietnam veteran, U.S. Marine, and also a columnist, and he's got an extensive background. But he's writing a book that he thinks can help maybe cure some of the ills in this country. And he'll be coming up, as I say, just after 9 o'clock news. I have another, he's making a point in his book too. This is just a little sliver of it, but he says that there is far too much government ownership of land, federal ownership of land in the United States today. Because I believe tomorrow we're going to have a guest with us talking about sportsmen in Idaho who are planning a rally on Thursday, in fact, they're opposed entirely to federal ownership of lands in the states. And they aren't alone. This is taking place in states all over the Mountain West. Details on all of these things coming up. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 39 right now. Brrr. Luckily, it won't last much longer. 39 right now at our studios on News Radio 1310 KLIX and all around the world on the web at newsradio1310.com. I'm very excited. I got to pass something along during this segment of the program. And I have a new sponsor joining the show. And I'm always happy to have new sponsors because you help me out when you do that, and you also help out News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, as well as Town Square Media. And if you'd like to join this program as a sponsor, and many of you may like what we talk about and may have a desire to see it continue, that's one way you can help us out. But yes, I just got news about this yesterday, and I'd like to share this with you very quickly. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. For a lot of people, this is a good second income. In fact, Ella Donahue, who was joining us on Fridays, most Fridays now from CSI, she was here the other day telling me that she's going to be picking up her license to drive school bus. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. That number again is 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. So there you have it. I'm glad to have them on board with us. Really excited about that, and hope we can see many, many more. Coming up on, I'm going to say 8:27. But I'm looking at the clock over here, the old-fashioned clock with the hands on it. But if I go back over to the computer, it says 8:25. So one of my clocks is running a little fast this morning. It possibly could not have had more coffee this morning than I've had because The word caffeine buzz may not sum it up today. And just 2 big cups. When Benito makes the coffee, it's like roofing tar. It's strong to drink, but I'll tell you what, you feel like you've been shot out of a cannon about half an hour after you finished a couple of cups of that. You can reach the program today at 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 40 right now at our studio, so we're back up a degree. Got a couple of things maybe related to some of the discussion about the concealed carry and the lack of a permit, which may happen. It's happened in a few other states as well. Alaska happens to be one of those. There is a story in The Hill, that's a newspaper out of Washington, that says states rise up against Washington. We're not talking Washington State. We're talking the nation's capital. But the states' rights movement is gaining some steam, and it's not only people on the right, it's people on the left, as we were talking about yesterday, as we have people in Alabama who are fighting over what they feel is the right of the states to decide who can get married and who can't. And there's a quote from a Kentucky state legislator. Her name is Diane St. Onge. She says, you have a choice to sit back and not do anything or say anything and let overregulation continue, or you have the alternative choice to speak up about it and say, quote, we know what you are doing or intend to do, and we don't think that is constitutional, and we as a state are not going to stand for it, unquote. Last month, she introduced a bill in her state to nullify federal gun control laws within Kentucky state lines. Similar legislation has been introduced in 7 other states. Quote, this law is saying the sheriff and those under him do not have to follow federal regulations, unquote, she said. Now, this is a notion that your sheriff, as a constitutionally elected individual, is actually the highest serving constitutional officer in your county. This goes all the way back to Northampton County, Virginia, in about 1667. I know that argument because a couple of friends of mine were working with the Constitutional Sheriff's Association, and they passed along a book, and that's mentioned prominently in that book. And that was the notion when the United States actually was created following that, was that the sheriff would have that sort of power and would supersede some federal agent coming in, whether to enforce a whiskey tax or whether to enforce prohibition, any number of things like that. It says, without the resources in the story that I'm reading to enforce its laws, the federal government is forced to rely on state action. When states refuse, federal law becomes virtually unenforceable. So this goes back to, as well, not only perhaps to gun laws, but to land use laws. I mean, any number of things like that. And in some states, there have been discussions that if you had a federal government that was going to try to come into a county and enforce its will, that the sheriff was simply going to put up a barricade on the highway and say, try and cross us. And this movement is gaining strength across the country. I've known a great many people. Sheriff Mack, who was a legendary sheriff, I believe, out of New Mexico, now lives in Texas. He has written some books about these issues. Joe Arpaio would be another one coming out of Arizona who is involved with all of this. Sheriff Clark, I believe, in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. You see him often on TV. These people are all involved with this, and they're saying that the government, the federal government's overreach has gotten so great that what they need to do is be the one office that can push back and say no. Now, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, the states retain those rights. The 9th Amendment says if it's not mentioned in the document, you as an individual retain those rights. You'll hear the argument from the left saying, well, yeah, but the Civil War decided the federal government supersedes all of this. Well, one side got shot up more than the other side and decided to quit. That tells me that's not really a legitimate argument. And it's funny that the people who detest war so much make that argument so often when it benefits them. And as I pointed out last week, you had 11 states that didn't get any say in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. Not that there's anything wrong with those amendments. I'm just telling you that's not fair play. And I thought that's what Lefty was always interested in. Steve Millington joining us in just a few minutes on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. 40 at 8:30. Steve Millington knows I do a microphone test usually when he comes in.
Every Tuesday morning. Yeah. Getting used to it.
He's joining us on Top Story today on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. And we do want to note 40 right now, looking for a high only in the upper 40s, but as the week progresses, things will start to warm up a bit. We might even see a little sunshine this weekend, although that long-range forecast said it was going to be warm and sunny this weekend. Now it looks to be kind of warm and some clouds, but still beats all that snow they've had back in places like Boston, Massachusetts. Not that I in any way feel sorry for them. That's just not in my nature. Steve Millington, you are the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party.
That's right.
And
Just an opening note here to keep in mind, we have our Lincoln Day banquet on February 28th,
Saturday
at the Canyon Crest Event Center. Social hours at 6, dinners at 7. We're getting more confirmed attendance all the time. We know that the Lieutenant Governor is going to be here. Congressman Simpson, he has a hearing in Washington, D.C. Friday morning from 7 to 9. If he can get on the plane after that and come back to Idaho, he will be here that Saturday night as well. We're looking for Senator Risch. We believe Senator Crapo is going to North Idaho. We've got Lieutenant Governor, obviously. Attorney General Lawrence Wasden. We got Ron Crane. We're looking for Sherry Ibarra, Brandon Wolf, some of our state constitutional officers.
Good golly, just about the entire state government's going to be there.
We know that we're going to lose some of them to go to North Idaho because we have a conflict on that date. But we are going to have the lion's share. And, it's our Twin Falls party. And when it's my party, I can do what I want. Yes. But we think and we maintain that we have the best Lincoln Day banquet in the state of Idaho. We have a great opportunity. We have good people. We have good food. We have great conversation. A lot of fun. Saturday, February 28th, Canyon Crest Event Center.
You were listening to me in the last half hour talk a bit about concealed carry.
Yeah.
This one. Now, yesterday, Randy Staples said he thinks could really fly this session that would be very quickly done.
There's a lot of individuals who think that this thing could just float right through there real quick. And I was really interested in your conversations about several of the states who are passing these anti-federal items. We want to eliminate this licensure for concealed carry, and I have mixed emotions on that. In my thinking, the principal reason to go through the licensure on concealed carry is that those individuals have been through a prescribed course program where they go in and they handle a gun, they learn how to shoot it, they know how to actuate the trigger, they can take the clip out, they can refill it and put it back in the gun, they do some target shooting, they do safe handling, they understand how to actuate the safety on the gun and proper control and usage, and that's not too much different from driving a car. I can get in a car and drive it up and down the road, and I do not need a license. But the fact that I have a license indicates that I have been through prescribed programs. I understand automobile safety. I understand my responsibilities and the responsibilities of others on the road. And it makes for a safer journey in a vehicle to know that all of us are subject to and adhere to the same set of rules. Now, with gun carry, I kind of like the idea that you've got a permit, that you took a prescribed course, and that you have some foundational training in how to handle that weapon, because there's many people who just don't pay attention to that.
I think the NRA, which is supporting the bill, feels though that at least it could, because like hunting safety, everyone, it's recommended you take a hunting safety course. You just don't go out and do it. But I think the NRA feels that you don't necessarily need to require it, but they would provide it and they would recommend it.
They do provide it, and most good, I shouldn't say that, most of our concealed carry instructors are NRA trained or approved. So they have been through the NRA training program so that they can become approved instructors. The government overreach in our lives is reaching epidemic proportions, and so we've got to take a stand and start pushing them back, get them out of our face, and get them off our back. And if we have to do this, okay, fine. But I do think that if you're a responsible gun carrier and gun owner, you will take it upon yourselves to have proper training and skill, and just backyard training is very often not enough. Go get some certified training where that you are cautioned about, here's what we've seen and here's how you respond and this is how you handle a weapon and this is what you should be aware of, and go get the proper training so you know what you're doing.
Well, we've got more coming up with Steve Millington. We'll also try to get to some of your telephone calls following these messages from some of our fine sponsors. It's 8:40 and 40 at our studios. Bill Colley with Steve Millington today on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. As I mentioned, we have a guest in the studio with us, and I'm going to try to get a telephone caller on the air with us, too, in just a moment. 8:44, 40 right now at our studios. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The telephone number 736-0300. Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republicans joining me, Bill Colley, this morning. And Steve, we have a caller with us, I think, right off the top here.
Good, let's take him.
You're on the air. You're on the air with Steve and Bill.
Yes, when the Democrats were a majority in the Senate, they passed new rules regarding the filibuster so that that they could override a filibuster. Now that the Republicans are in charge, didn't they just have a vote on the Homeland Security, or they refused to vote on Homeland Security, and the Republicans did not?
Steve, did you notice this, that of course the media says it's good when Democrats do it and bad when
the Republicans want to do it, it's a horrible, terrible thing. And I recall certain Republicans cautioning Harry Reid, one of these days we're going to be in charge and this thing's going to come back and you're not going to like it. And guess what? Here we are. And
Harry had a big fall.
And yeah, no kidding, twice I think. Once was his fall from political grace, and another one was he fell at home doing something and injured his eye real bad. So yeah, he really has fallen from grace.
We have another caller joining us, and you're up next on KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you may have a question or a thought for Steve Millington.
I do. I guess since John Kasich came here, governor of Ohio, about 3 weeks ago, stirred up the pot about the potential for having a constitutional convention, supposedly to balance the budget. And I guarantee you, the liberals, socialists, pinkos, commies, and so forth have been trying to get their hands on the Constitution. And there's a lot of money being pushed behind this movement. And the whole balanced budget thing should be handled differently than what they're trying to do here. But trying to put the Constitution on the table and the potential of a runaway Constitution is very likely, and legal authorities have said that. So, people need to be aware. Idaho rescinded its call for a constitutional convention many years ago, and rightfully so. We were only 2 states from having a constitutional convention way back in the 70s with the Equal Rights Amendment.
Well, Steve, maybe on that point, you could...
the interesting thing about that is that our caller has some very interesting points. I am completely in favor of a balanced budget amendment. However, no one can satisfy me at this point on 3 or 4 major questions that I have concerning a constitutional convention. Number one, can we absolutely fail-safe guarantee that it will be a one-item only agenda? And nobody can answer that for me and say, yes, here's the precedent, here's the legal standing, we can have a one-issue only constitutional convention. They can't answer that for me. Number two, who's going to represent Idaho? Will it be one person, as in, for example, a governor from each state would be our representative to this convention? Or perhaps would it be 2 people from each state, for example, United States senators? Or would it be more like the House of Representatives, where it would be apportioned on a population basis? And the precedent for the population basis originally occurred in 1789 when we signed the original concept that not the original. Well, it was the original Constitution. We had an Articles of Confederation before that, but the Constitution was allocated on populations because none of the states had identical representation. Well, I read an article recently, and Kasich, when he was here, they proposed this idea, and Idaho would have 7 delegates to the Constitutional Convention. I don't know where they come up with 7, but if Idaho has 7, think with me just a moment. We have four electoral votes, 2 senators and 2 congressmen. California has 55 electoral votes. So if we get 7 votes to the Constitutional Convention, California is going to have 100 of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't like those odds. And until somebody can answer for me how they're going to select the delegates to this Constitutional Convention, I'm very suspect. And nobody has yet been able to satisfy my curiosity about, can we make it a single item only agenda? And I think maybe for a balanced budget, there are other ways we can do this. If the Congress back there had a half a backbone, they could just pass a law that says we have to have a balanced budget.
Amen.
Period. Now, Warren Buffett a few years ago, and I'm not a great fan of his, but I wish I had been successful in my investing endeavors as he has been in his, but he made a comment that balancing the budget is a very simple thing, and people are putting too much angst into this. Just pass a law that says if the United States budget is not balanced within 3%, no seated member of the Congress can ever run for public office again. You're going to have a balanced budget, boys and girls.
Very quickly.
Very quick. Instantly, you're going to have a balanced budget. And so these people who say we want to have a constitutional convention to get us a balanced budget, whoa, back up the bus. First, we want to make for sure that it's a single item only agenda, and nobody has yet been able to validate that for me. Now, I understand that Mark Levine has come up with some very clever ideas with his constitutional background and study, and he said, yes, we can do this, but that's his opinion only. Now, whether or not that would hold up a court challenge, that'd be an interesting question. And the other thing is, I don't want to have a runaway. If Idaho has 7 delegates to this convention, then there's going to be 1,000 or more people in the room. And I'm really sorry, but we can't get anything done to speak of with only 435 members in the United States House of Representatives. How in the world are you going to get anything meaningful done with 1,000 people sitting in that room and everybody has their own agenda?
We wanted to mention a couple other things. You mentioned single issues, so we wanted to mention a couple other points this morning.
Okay. Yep. This broadband. Mr. Obama, in all of his genius and brilliance, wants to have the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, take over control of the internet. And he uses all kinds of cloak and smoke and mirrors to veil what he really wants. Mm-hmm. Now, the smoke and mirrors is, gee whiz, everybody should have access to high-speed internet, and we should be able to get it everywhere in the country. And if you watch television at all, there's several of these satellite outfits that say, hey, bundle your package with us, and you get high-speed internet for $10 a month or whatever. I don't know what the number is. That's not the real issue. The real issue is the federal government wants to control the medium that they use for internet broadcasts so that they can control the content. And when we look at this, oh, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have 10 gigabytes download or 40 or 100 or whatever the new numbers are for $10 a month? Wait a minute. This just smacks right in the face of, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor.
You know what it reminds me of a caller yesterday who referenced Alex Jones, who is primarily in internet production. He has some radio affiliates, but he has a massive footprint on the internet. He does often criticize the government. Now, and he is a conspiracy theorist. There could be people out there who say, well, we don't think that this is proper for the internet now that it's regulated, just like they say with radio. You can't say this, you can't say that. And somebody who's an appointed bureaucrat will make the decision on what's right and wrong.
That's right. And we may not view it in the same light, But burning books is not nearly as effective as censorship. And the thing we want to watch more carefully than these other items is who's going to be controlling the switches, and will they in fact be censoring content? I can very easily see where that we get people who are opposed to the current trend in government, and they hit the airwaves, and they're bad-mouthing certain events in Washington, D.C. primarily, for them suddenly one day to just disappear. Their program is no longer on the air.
Well, that you can find things like the Turner Diaries on which were the impetus that Timothy McVeigh read that and felt that it was almost like a call to action. That type of stuff is on the internet. Now, you may not like it, but that's what government would come in and do, is say you can't have that here.
We're gonna delete that from the content list, and you can't get access to it. And if that's the case, then just exactly when would it be that they say, "Oh my goodness, you can't have the Bible on there anymore because there's several instances in there where the things were really bad, and so that's not good for you, and we're going to eliminate it."
We have another caller with us. It's 8:54 and 41 right now on Top Story and at News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. And you're up next with our guest, Steve Millington.
Bill Colley, I love what you're doing with our station. Welcome to the Magic Valley. And I am so happy that Steve is covering this item this morning, because it has been very worrisome to me. And thank you for covering that, because I see all kinds of bad things coming down the road with that. And I appreciate that. And touch on something about what our Congress people, if they get off their duffs, will be doing about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And the caller makes a very interesting but somewhat subtle point. If we sit around and do nothing, we lose our rights. There's an old adage that all that's required for, I've forgotten it, for something to happen is for evil to thrive, is for good men to do nothing.
Right.
And that's paraphrasing. That's not exactly the way but that's the intent. And our caller's correct. We cannot sit on our duff and wonder what's going to happen. 20 years ago, none of us, internet, we thought you were talking about a fishing net that you used. No. Every day of my life, I'll bet I spend at least an hour and a half scooting around through various conservative websites. And I am confident that if the government took over that internet, most of those websites would disappear. Because already this morning, I have read 4 or 5 articles that were not flattering of Obama and his administration. Well, I don't hear that on the, quote, drive-by media, unquote. I think that's a Rush Limbaugh number. But the drive-by media is never going to tell me that. So I can get it from the internet if I know where to go looking. And this is a real thing. And more importantly, we're putting all of our classroom, our students, our schools have got to be on the internet. So we have this advanced learning technology. Well, duh. Who's going to be controlling all of that content? It isn't going to be your local school district. It's going to be Big Brother. So this is we gotta fight like.
Got about a minute left, Steve, and I do want to mention you have a dinner coming up again.
Yep, we do.
February 28th.
February 28th at the Canyon Crest Event Center. We're going to have most of our statewide constitutional officers here. We're going to have. We've got high hopes for Congressman Simpson and for Senator Jim Risch. And so great opportunity. Lots of people who have like-minded ideas. We can. You want to ask questions of our elected officials? We will have most of them here. And I have not burrowed down into. We will have the legislative representatives from District 23, 24, 25, 26, and probably 27. A year ago, we had many people from the Boise Valley legislative elected officers who came to our Lincoln Day banquet, because on that particular day, it's the biggest show in the state. So they come here. You have lots of opportunity for interaction. We'll have our county officials, and last year we had county officials from from Cassia County and Jerome County as well. great opportunity, people, to get out and
Just to say hello.
yeah, just visit, say hello, give them your ideas. They're looking for opportunities to engage with their constituency and get a feel for, is this good or is this bad?
There's just so much we never get to that I'm going to have to recommend Steve Millington gets his own show.
or we could stretch this another 30 minutes. Bill, it's your show. You run the switches. But you're right. Some mornings we just don't get through the material.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing.
Try again. Yeah, very good thing.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll see you again next week.
Yes, we will.
All right, coming up next, we have news from Fox. Also, one more hour of Top Story. I had a guest joining us just after the newscast, Ed Matson. 5 years as a U.S. Marine in Vietnam. Now a columnist and author, going to be talking about what ails this country and his prescription for turning it back around. That's on the way in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There has been, I think, a lot of discussion on this program since I arrived at News Radio 1310 KLIX about where the heck has my country gone? Because those of us who are old enough remember the way things were, and the last 50 years culturally, to call it a roller coaster ride is to put it mildly. It has been rough at times for a great many people. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, anywhere around the world. Online, of course, and 40 at our studios. I'm Bill Colley on Top Story, and I have a very special guest joining us who, that 50 years is interesting to note that 50 years ago, he had just entered the United States Marine Corps and served his country for 7 years in the Corps. Once they say a Marine, always a Marine. And after that, he's gone on and he's become a writer, and he has just completed a book called Down on Main Street, Searching for American Exceptionalism. His name is Ed Matson, and he's joining us this morning on Top Story. And first of all, welcome to the program.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. It's good to get calls from the other side of the country. Down in North Carolina, we just envy all that snow you folks get. And
not much here this winter.
I'm being facetious, of course, but having traveled much of that area up there, it's a beautiful country, and you found a good place to light. They're great people up there.
I was pleasantly surprised when I crossed the Continental Divide that my Jeep actually made it without huffing and puffing. So that's a little bit better shape than I am at this stage of my life. You wrote this book, and I guess my introduction mentioned that you've been a good witness as to what's happened over a period of decades, and you're not at all pleased, but you still remain quite hopeful.
Yeah, it's... I see today's youth, and they're so much smarter with all the things that they have before them, but they're so dumb at the same time. They don't realize that you learn from history, and it's, this is such a great country, but, half of them can't find, they think, if you ask them what states north of South Carolina, they'll probably tell you, Michigan. They have no sense of what's going on around them, and that's a pity because, 2.7 million of our youth have died trying to keep this country safe and sane as well as the rest of the world. And it's kind of disheartening, but I do have a lot of faith in them because, man, if they catch on, it's they'll rewrite history.
I've always been sort of aware, too, that while we've seen a lot of changes in this country and technology and as well as culturally and we think that people's values have changed, but it does strike me when you just go out and you meet people who, they're running a shop or they're running a farm or they're working in a business. They really aren't much different, I think, than they were. It's I guess, some of the actions of government that have really changed things drastically, if not the people.
Yeah, governments, especially about the last 20 years in particular, it's been a slow drag since the days of Franklin D. Roosevelt and the change that the government's going to be the father, the mother, the daughter, and the grandfather of the people. But the last maybe 20, 25 years, we've really seen it come down hard on the small business owner who provides most of the jobs in this country. And to hear Hillary Clinton not too long ago say, well, small business doesn't create the jobs, as if the government creates the jobs. They don't produce anything except take money from us in taxes.
You mentioned in the book at one point about the federal government's land grab, which In this part of the country, of course, is a huge concern. There's a rally at our state capitol Thursday, and sportsmen, of course, say that they would just like to see the federal government pack up and leave. But it's not ending. They are grabbing more and more land all the time from what you're writing about.
They now control about a third of the entire country is under federal control, whether it be the Railroad Commission or whether it be the Bureau of Indian Land Management or whatever it is. The government controls a lot of it, and one third of the country. And that could eventually be our ticket out of this $18 trillion immediate debt and the $100 trillion of long-term debt the country's incurred, if they would make that land productive, whether they lease it or go for the mineral rights. But I don't see that happening under any administration now or on the horizon.
For people who'd like to know a little bit more about the book, I mean, where would you direct them if they'd like to pick up a copy of it?
Oh, all your usual suspects, Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. It's available in ebook on Amazon, and you can actually order online on my website, which is downonmainstreet.net. And everybody who orders a book on, from my site, I sign it and send it out to them. And I think they'll find it. There is actually some humor when you look back on this country. When you look at the greats that have made this country, and I've spent a lot of time, as you know, in the middle of the book talking about the greatest generation, which Brokaw wrote about. And of course, when a conservative like myself, and I tell people conservative, I'm to the right of Attila the Hun, but the fact is, when Brokaw writes about it, all the liberals jump on and say, ooh, when I write it, and even quote from Brokaw, because I'm a conservative, it takes a different slant, and I don't understand that mentality. But that greatest generation, they all volunteered. Most of them volunteered to go to war to defend this country. And today, when there's any kind of a problem, all the Hollywood crowd, they hop on a plane and leave the country and then get over there and badmouth us. I can't comprehend that.
Our guest is Ed Matson, and he's written a book, Down on Main Street, Searching for American Exceptionalism. It's 9:13 on Top Story and News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley, 41 at our studios. Looking for a high of 48 today, and then things will gradually warm up during the week. You referenced that greatest generation and the service, and they were willing to do it because they felt it was a job that had to be done. You come from a similar background, having spent a good long time in the Marine Corps. You got something there that I think a lot of people today don't recognize because there's so few people who have a service background, and do we need to see more of that?
Yeah, the military is a great disciplinarian. And today, a lot of kids, don't get it at home because for a lot of kids, there is no home. There's no father figure. There's no, mother's working. And even if two-parent family, they're both are working, the kids come home, they become latchkey kids. They have to fend for themselves, and they don't get the guidance that they need. So the military is a great disciplinarian, but by the same token, you look at anybody that's been in the military, they don't just say yeah and no, yes sir, no sir, no ma'am, yes ma'am. That's just the discipline you get. It's respect for your elders, which, with the grace of God, maybe I'll live long enough to become an elder. Of course, I'm 70 now, but my wife's 45, and she told me she's going to keep me alive until at least I'm 100, and I keep asking her, don't do me so much favor. I'll probably end up going crazy over politics.
You, in fact, speaking of just, I think that we saw just in the last week, you referenced Brokaw, his successor seems to have some envy of people who served in uniform, and you write to a great degree about the fact that we've got a lot of that going on everywhere in culture now, people being envious of someone who might have a bigger house or a bigger car or a better retirement. And this itself is creating too many divisions within us.
Yeah, the Dante was right on target when he started talking about the deadly sins, and envy is one that many of us have, and it's I guess you'd call it human nature, because all great civilizations have gone that way, and they've all declined because of the seven deadly sins. And you speak about the current situation with Brian Williams. I don't understand that. With today's technology and the verifiability of things through videotape, and it's awful hard to stretch the truth, and it will come out no matter the passage of years. And I think he should do the right thing and just say, well, I'm going to go do something else, because it's really hard to believe that I'm not one to throw dirt on a pile dirt on a guy, but how do you maintain your credibility when you've just actually done things that you haven't done, if you know what I mean?
When you talk about a lot of these issues, and I think that people who try to puff themselves up or they're envious and the like, we really have lost, if we've lost anything, it's sort of that Judeo-Christian foundation that we used to have. And I would imagine that as we move more and more into saying government is God, do you see that being an issue that we can quickly remedy, or how do we turn that around?
Well, I'm like a lot of people. I'm frustrated with government. Matter of fact, my wife, who's from Eastern Europe, she was a volunteer at my pediatric center, children's cancer center that we had in Eastern Europe, and I brought her here. And I come back to this country after being out of it for quite a while in Eastern Europe, and everything I own is gone with the collapse of 2008, 2009. And not that I was such a diligent investor, I just didn't pay any attention to it, because when I lost my first wife, I decided, well, I better go do something about changing the world, because I don't have a lot of time left. But, the values that our parents had, and you mentioned the Judeo-Christian values, I see a resurgence of that. Matter of fact, I just saw a billboard this morning that was talking about the children actors. They have a Christian coalition, and they're putting billboards up all over North Carolina here. And I think it does bode a little bit, some light at the end of the tunnel, that they may be coming around to it, because they can see. I mean, you have to be a fool not to see that the position that we're in right now, that these socialist progressive policies, they've never worked in history, not a single example. And they always have to be held together by the point of a gun. And after, my wife lived through that in Eastern Europe, and when she came here, she said, my gosh, they're all going where we just left. And she can't comprehend it. But, I think the religious values, I don't want to be anything of a pessimist on it, but I think that's going to probably be our salvation, just whether you believe in God or not. Just the biblical tenets of the Ten Commandments are pretty important. That's what we base all our laws on.
For people, again, before we go, who'd like to pick up a copy of the book, you mentioned, of course, you could go to Amazon and other places, but what's your website again, so they could go directly there, and maybe they can find some other things, too, that might be a little inspirational?
Well, it's just like I got the title, where are you going to find the answers to today's problem? Down on Main Street. So it's downonmainstreet.net. And the title of the book is Down on Main Street, Searching for American Exceptionalism. And it's still there. Got to look a little harder sometimes, but boy, is it there. And great things are happening every day. But I'll leave you with one thought. Lily Tomlin's quote, which is the last quote in my book, it's, 98% of the Americans are good, honest, hardworking people. The other 2%, well, they get all the glory, and they're a bunch of schmucks, but we voted for them.
Ed Mattson, thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Well, thank you, and God bless you all up there.
All right, take care now. Ed Mattson joining us this morning, and speaking of exceptional people, he has written a book called Down on Main Street, Searching for American Exceptionalism. And as he said, if you go to downonmainstreet.net, you can find a copy. He'll autograph it for you, too, and send it your way. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 41 right now at our studios. Got a lot more to talk about. Oh, my goodness. The world seems to be coming unraveled. Feed the Pig could describe actually what happens at our studios with the kitty cats who eat out back every day. There's about 4 of them, and they have rapacious appetites. I cannot. It's like feeding dogs, and they just keep gobbling and gobbling. And these are not feral cats. They live in the neighborhood, but they just come by, and there's a food dish out back. But we've discovered, well, all right, I've discovered if you give them some chicken livers or a few scraps of tavern ham, they go right to town. And oddly enough, I thought the chicken livers would be the major attraction, but no, that the ham scraps and how quickly with those tiny mouths, but with those great big incisors in those tiny mouths, they can just. I think they're swallowing the food whole. It's like a competition. They look around to make sure nobody else is coming up on them to try to take any of it away. 924. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Want to thank you for joining us this morning. I mentioned in the last hour that we have a new sponsor on the program, and I'm always welcoming to new sponsors because this is a business, and that means they keep me working. And the more sponsors I have, the better job security that I'm going to have. And so I'm very proud to announce Western States joining us. In fact, Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, scheduled no school days, and pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. That number once more, 733-8003. Western States Bus Service is an equal opportunity employer. I was mentioning to the folks in the office yesterday that when I was a kid, a great many of the farm wives, and even some of the farmers themselves, well, okay, I guess they were both farmers, but the wives often were the bus drivers to make up the second income. Sometimes the husband did that, finish a morning milking, and then go out and drive bus, but often it was easier for the husband to go out to the barn, the woman to try to get the kids ready for school, and then that was a very traditional form of living that we had when I was growing up. So we had a whole series of bus drivers who were actually women, and that second income helped pay a lot of bills because anyone who's in the farming business, I'll tell you what, you're not getting rich. You do it because you enjoy it, and it's kind of like being in radio, except I don't have anyone in the family driving a bus right now. We're working on that. I do it myself, but I tend to be tied up in the early morning hours. 26 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley again with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I saw a story today, and it was a banner story in the Wall Street Journal, and it's in the business section, too, of that newspaper. If you can find it online, it says, "It's no fun making toasters in USA. With few contract manufacturers in U.S., many businessmen turn to China's expertise and scale." The fellow who wrote the story is named James R. Hagerty. That would mean that he's got Irish ancestry, at least somewhere in his family. You can tell by that last name. But he writes, unlike China, the U.S. has few contract manufacturers geared up to make consumer products on a large scale. They did a feature story with a toy company in Texas, and the toy company comes up with some great ideas for toys, but it doesn't have a manufacturing process of its own. So it has to go find someone else. It has to outsource the manufacturing. The owner of the company would like to keep that work in the United States. He can find no one who can do a long-term project on an assembly line making the toys in this country. This huge landmass, 50 states. I mean, massive, massive landmass. What, fourth largest country geographically in the world, fourth or fifth? And yet, there's nobody here who can do this work? The writer says that makes it harder for the U.S. to revive manufacturing. It wouldn't make economic sense for the U.S. to try to make everything at home, of course. But even a modest increase in domestic manufacturing would create jobs and skills that could fuel further economic growth. It also would reduce the chronic U.S. trade deficit. But again, you cannot find anyone. My mother, who worked, well, she took a few years off in the middle to raise children. That's how it was done in that era. But otherwise, she started working at a factory 1 year after she got out of high school. She worked in a bakery for a year, then got a job in a factory. She took some leave to raise 3 kids and get us off into school and the like, and then she went back to work about the time I was in the 4th grade, and she worked the night shift for many, many years again, and then got moved back to day shift. She had to work nights. That way my dad, who worked days, could be around to watch us so they wouldn't have to pay an expensive charge for babysitting. And no one knew what daycare was at the time. You just, the neighbor, she might be 15, would come over and watch you maybe for half an hour until dad got home after school. And she usually was as big a disciplinarian as mom and dad, from what I remember. But my mother ended up working, it spanned 44 years in this one factory. And a year before her retirement, state government came in, and this has become a habit even among Republican administrations around the country. They come in and they say, oh, we have seed money. That means money taken from all of the rest of you. They give to the factory and say, here, now you can upgrade your plant so you won't have to move it to Mexico or China. So the company took all of that money, built a brand new, beautiful factory a few miles down the road from where the original had been that had saved my community in the Great Depression. Stayed there 1 year, collected the millions of dollars from the taxpayers, then packed up and left. Again, no one builds much anymore in this country. Got to get back to that. It's the only way to really save what we have. You got to take things out of the ground, turn them into other things, and sell them to other people. Our caller mentioned that. The mineral wealth we have is astronomical, except the dadgum government is sitting atop it and won't let us get to it. Half an hour left in our program. In fact, that's a topic of discussion on our program tomorrow. There is a story on the Associated Press wire this morning from the state capitol. In an effort to cut down on the use of public defenders in Idaho, a legislative panel introduced several bills that would change some misdemeanor charges to lesser infractions. In other words, they may not necessarily then carry jail time. It's 9:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Right now it's 41 at our studios. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach the program by dialing me at 736-0300. 736-0300. I was reading this and it struck me. There was a newspaper story a few weeks ago about drug court, where you have some people, if they're willing to go through drug court, they can turn their lives around, clean up their lives, keep their noses clean, literally sometimes, and stay out of jail. And it has been successful to some degree. And so you've gotten some people who, what they call a recidivist rate, they do end up going back to it. But for the most part, the results have been very good. But when I was reading this story and they talk about public defenders, do you know why we have so many public defenders and we're so overwhelmed and that the cost is so high? Drug crimes. So when I read something like this, it tells me, all right, somehow, somewhere, they're feeling the pressure in state government. It's already happened in Colorado and Washington State. And the thought is, well, if we would just legalize certain controlled substances, then we wouldn't have to worry about charges and public defenders and all of these. And by the way, we could take money out of that ourselves by taxing it. So we continue to go down this road because you've got gambling interests and you've got people saying, well, we can then, and the ultimate thing is, in all 50 states, it will eventually happen if we don't have some sort of great awakening again. You will have gambling legalized, prostitution legalized, and drugs legalized because government will say, well, then we don't have to put away all of those people behind bars who are involved in those what are crimes now. And what we can simply do is take a cut of that. And by taking a cut of that, we can put that money back into buying votes from people in certain various special interest groups. Plus, you are going to get the votes of all of the prostitutes, dope dealers, and gamblers anyway when that happens. Now, I'm not saying Idaho is going to have this happen tomorrow or next year, but the pressures are going to be so great on your state governments. Story out of Colorado last week, where they have had, of course, legalized dope and people are jumping out of windows because they're taking such powerful stuff. Story says the Republicans are incurring the wrath of Colorado liberals because Republicans say people shouldn't be able to buy, they should not be able to use their welfare checks to buy dope. In other words, they're taking their EBT cards in and they're buying marijuana at these dispensaries. You're paying for that. You're paying for their dope. How do you, well, you can say, well, that's Colorado. Well, somewhere, somehow, there's intermingling of funds that come into welfare payments for people all over the country. And every time we say, well, this is a solution for this problem, we just create another problem when we do that. No one seems to have an ability. Every law, first of all, that we pass in this country should contain a sunset provision. Because sometimes we pass laws and there are unintended consequences. And bad things then happen because of those laws. So if a law sunsetted every 3 years, that means the legislators would have to sit down and they would have to say to themselves, all right, did this law work? Okay, if it did, we'll continue it. We'll pass it again. But if it didn't work, it'll just simply go off the books. Very simply done. But no one seems to have any interest in doing that. So Legislators in Idaho have been trying to fix Idaho's patchwork public defender system for years. A report from the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, that means a lot of liberals, in 2010 found that public defenders' caseloads are too high and some defendants didn't meet their lawyers until entering the courtroom. Well, that's not a surprise. So the argument will be legalize the dope, but you don't have to worry about this. Welcome to the modern world. 938, Bill Colley with you. You can also reach the program by sending me an email at bill.colley, that's Colley, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. And before we wrap up the program today, I'm down to 20 minutes plus Mike Huckabee in there, so we're probably looking more at about 15 minutes. There's been some more writing about the remarks made by the President of the United States last week at the National Prayer Breakfast. Did you know that your mainstream media, that is your establishment old line media, like the old alphabet news networks, although one of them has a bigger fire to put out right now than just, worrying about what stories they're covering. But at the old alphabet news networks and most of the major newspapers in the United States, there was very little coverage of the president's remarks where he equated Christianity to violent Islamic extremism. Gee, I wonder why his fellow travelers in media, who are constantly offering him a group Lewinsky, wouldn't say that he put his foot in his mouth at this breakfast. So days have passed. That breakfast was Wednesday or Thursday morning of last week. And now, finally, here we are, Tuesday of the following week, one of his own, his fellow traveler, Eugene Marvin the Martian Robinson from the Washington Post and MSDNC's Morning Joe, has a column today and says, at the prayer breakfast, President Obama struck a patronizing tone. For the record, he says Obama's history lesson was also incomplete. And he mentions that Christianity spawned the abolitionist movement in the United States and the civil rights movement in the United States. And he says, talking about the Spanish Inquisition or the Crusades, things that happened 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, and trying to make a comparison is absolutely ridiculous. And he says that his fellow traveler in the White House looks really, really bad. Finally. Of course, they got him elected twice. They don't have a problem criticizing him now. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. More coming up on Top Story. Story from far, far away today. From Boise, actually. Idaho statesman. Cable One disputes FCC's report criticizing broadband access in Idaho. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but when I was having my broadband hooked up a few weeks ago, the individual who did a very nice job and seemed to really know what he was talking about did admit that perhaps just the scope of broadband is, he said, maybe 10 years behind in Idaho from where it might be other parts of the country. But he did a nice job, and I've got good service. I'm not complaining about that. Everything at home is working just fine. And that may be the first time in my life I have ever said that when I'm talking about a cable company. 9:45, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. The only thing that gets me, like I'll be driving down Blue Lakes Boulevard and you pass a Motel 6 and you'll see a price listed, $49.99 for a room. Maybe it's $39.99, but you'll see a price listed. When was the last time you ever walked into a hotel after seeing one of those signs and actually found that was the price of the room? It's not. Well, of course, you've got this tax and you got this fee and that fee, and so all of a sudden, it's a lot more expensive than what. And of course, $39.99 is $40. It's just they hope that you're seeing the 30 instead of the 40 when you see $39.99. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just an old advertising. They use it all. I'm not even going to color the ruse. It's effective and it's honest and not hiding anything. But the same thing with cable. When you see a cable ad that says for $34.99 or $35 or whatever it is, and then you call them, and then they say, all right, we'll be able to install it on June 4th of 2018, and it'll be $55 a month. Well, wait a minute. The ad I have in front of me says it's $34.99. Well, yes, but cut the bait and switch. Just tell me right off the top what I'm going to be paying. You don't want to do that, though, do you? Because if you actually do that, then you understand there's a competitor out there who is offering telephone and internet service at a greatly reduced price. And if you actually come out and say, oh, but by the way, we're also going to have these additional charges that will maybe not double what you're paying, but certainly raise it by a third, perhaps to two-thirds, you might turn me off. But I'm a little peeved when I actually call and try to set everything up, and you start telling me, well, yeah, but you got to pay this, you got to pay that, and just be upfront with me. That's all I'm asking. But the cable company, I think, has a legitimate argument in this particular case. It appears that President Obama's Federal Communications Commission, known as the FCC, used old data. They're looking at maps and data that might be 10 years old in claiming that Idaho has to get off the schneid with broadband internet. Now, these are the same people. Today is, it's the middle of February. We'll just say that. But in a couple of weeks, on February 26th, a Thursday, so I guess it's a couple of weeks from Thursday this week, the Federal Communications Commission, and we were talking about this earlier with Steve Millington, is going to be sitting down, and President Obama, even though it's supposedly somewhat independent, has pressured them to go along with his ideas on something called net neutrality. And he says, oh, well, we've got to do this, or otherwise your local cable company will slow down websites it doesn't like. And then promote websites it does like, especially if it's a website it owns or it's part of its media empire. So we've got to do this for your own good. Well, they're going to put the internet under something called Title II and regulate it as a utility. Just a month or two ago, the chairman of the FCC wasn't buying any of this. Why is he now agreeing with it? Well, because somebody named President Obama came along and said, I did a favor for you. I appointed you to the board. And just like Dr. Faust, you now owe me your life. So this is what the guy has done. He's suddenly going to go along with this. Backers say this is the only way to truly keep internet providers from slowing traffic for those not paying higher prices. Republicans say that they too are opposed to throttling, blocking, and paid prioritization online, but argue that such issues should be addressed through legislation. This is coming from this morning's Washington Examiner. Not regulating the internet like a public utility. In other words, we have guys who make laws. They can make laws to protect you in that situation, if that be the case. But that government stepping in, because government's ultimate goal is, they're going to say, I don't like this particular website. It's mean-spirited, it's hurtful, and therefore you can't have this website up. Just what they do in radio. We are under certain restrictions. And they're going to throw that right back at us on the internet. And you will see a lot of things that you like on the internet right now that may go away. Got about a minute before the break, so I quickly want to squeeze someone in with us on Top Story. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Well, since they're basically going to limit our internet service, are they going to cut back our monthly fees for that internet?
No, I don't think that's in the cards.
I don't think so either.
Thank you much for the call. I just was thinking about this the other day. As expensive as internet is, my parents didn't pay for internet access. They didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have cable TV. No wonder they always had more money in their pockets than I do. Think about that for a moment. What we paid for just a telephone service, and your local calls were just in town. If I wanted to call my grandmother 16 miles away, that was long distance. You understand what I'm talking about, but hey, it's what we want. 10 minutes away, hey, Mike Huckabee coming up next. And the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Once more, that is brought to you by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. I want to thank Reverend Governor Huckabee for his time again this morning. 9:54, you're listening to Bill Colley today on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, around the world, at least for now, on the World Wide Web at newsradio1310.com. Nobody calls it World Wide Web anymore. You don't even type in the www. It's just 20 years down the road. And yeah, that's. I still remember listening to Rush Limbaugh when he was talking on the air about how to reach him at CompuServe. Yeah, that might have been 100 years ago. But I remember hearing him and thinking, what the heck is he talking about? And here we are today. But I do want to mention tomorrow we've got a guest I believe is going to be joining us fairly early in the program. and he's representing Idaho sportsmen. On Thursday, these people are having a rally at the state capitol, and they're calling for an end. I'm not a rollback, but an absolute end to federal ownership of land in the state of Idaho. 63% of the state, which is under the grip of Washington. They want it to completely go away. Scheduled to join us tomorrow morning on the program. These rallies are taking place, as I was mentioning earlier, at state capitals throughout the region in Montana, Wyoming, and Washington State, and I believe Utah. So you're seeing some interest in this, and I think it's a growing interest. And I really do believe that the American public has finally reached, and when we say public, we're not talking about everybody. Lefty out there still wants to control everyone and still believes everyone else is bad except for Lefty. That's what happens when God apparently makes you better or you're God's favorite. Well, if there is a God from Lefty's perspective. But I bring this up because you're seeing, I think, a recognition among the public that government has just gotten too far out of control, that it is trying to regulate and control everything you do in your own personal life, and it's just got to come to an end. It's got to stop. Because the whole notion of liberty, which the Constitution for your average lefty is nothing more than a table napkin. It's whatever they want it to be on any particular day they wake up with, however what mood they happen to be in. And that's what they want to pursue. And I think the rest of us realize that is a very, very dangerous proposition. And if we don't do something soon, they're going to run away with the liberties that we once had. And whenever anybody comes to you and says, well, this is for a public good, you know what they're angling at. Just trust us. We're in charge of deciding what's good. And therefore, you have to give this up so we can ensure, or they say it's for the children, or it's for the snail darter. You've got just every ridiculous argument you'll hear from these people. You know, when we saw that story last week that the red fox has reappeared in some of the national parks here in the Mountain West and had been gone for, they thought, 100 years. Well, apparently not. There's not many cameras out there. That's why you're not seeing them. So the screaming memes who were making all the noise about that apparently were wrong. And there's no end to what they're trying to do. It's like the devil continually probes for a weakness. And that's what we're seeing. And as Steve Millington said earlier, you've got to be forever vigilant. And you can't be quiet about it. If you're quiet about it, they'll walk all over you. Rush Limbaugh is coming up next following news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Sean Hannity will follow news at 1 o'clock this afternoon from Fox. And then coming up this afternoon, Glenn Beck following news at 4 o'clock from Fox. My name is Bill Colley. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. 41 at our studios. God willing and the creek don't rise, I am back here in this very chair at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.